Hi, my name's Vince Sheehan, and today I'd like to talk about Beethoven's Third Piano Concerto in C minor. I'd like to go through this famous work, exploring how it's put together. In other words, the structure. I do believe that having some understanding of form in classical music can greatly aid our appreciation and enjoyment of it. Now, Beethoven probably wrote this around about 1800, but it wasn't premiered until 1803. Along with the Second Symphony and Christ on the Mount of Olives, that oratorio he wrote. And Beethoven was the soloist, and apparently he hadn't finished writing all the parts, and he was kind of filling in the blanks, etc., as you'd imagine a genius like him could. Now, this piano concerto is rather stormy in nature. It's in C minor, of course, shares the same key as the Fifth Symphony a few years later. And you get the impression perhaps Beethoven was self-consciously writing a piece which he felt was quite weighty and substantial in tone. And indeed it's one of those pieces which seems to tie in with the romantic image of Beethoven as the troubled genius of struggle, I guess. The concerto, as you'd expect, is in 3 movements. And the first movement, also as you'd expect, begins with an orchestral tutti, which lays out the themes. It's an exposition, as in most concertos of this time, you have 2 expositions, one of the orchestra alone, which acts as a kind of introduction, and then the second exposition with the soloist as well. And we begin with the first subject, with this unforgettable theme, which almost acts like a motto. We hear it in the second subject group as well. The opening idea, that motto idea, is very similar to Mozart's 24th Piano Concerto, again in C minor. Different meter. And so on. I remember playing in an orchestra, both accompanying those 2 concertos around about the same time, and thinking, surely Beethoven's ripped Mozart off here. But anyway, Beethoven's allowed to do that. And then after we hear that tune, we hear it again in E flat major as well. And then eventually we come to a transition, which I'll play the violin. So on. That transition then takes us to the second subject, which in the orchestral exposition we do modulate to E flat major, and that goes like this. And so on. Lovely tune. And then we hear the motto idea again, this time passed around the orchestra almost in a developmental way. It seems even in the exposition Beethoven is flexing his muscles here. And so on. And eventually, via a short link, we get to the Codetta. I like the Codetta, it's very kind of passionate. The violin part's like a stab in the heart, it's like... And after some C minor scales by the pianist, Then the whole thing starts again, this time with the soloist. And so on, slightly more florid version. We eventually get to the transition again, and then we get to the second subject again in E flat major. That carries on. Then we hear the motto rhythm. In the strings we hear this, which of course is from that motto idea from the beginning, the first subject. And then we finally hear that first subject, that motto idea again in the second subject group in the horns and clarinets. And then that takes us to the Codetta, this time in E flat major. And then again, via some linking scales, we're back to the first subject in the development, this time in G minor. Then we hear this kind of dialogue in the woodwinds at bar 279, and then eventually the short development works itself up to a head of steam, and after this cascade of piano notes we're back to C minor with this fortissimo statement of the tune in the whole orchestra in this monophonic texture. So we're into the recapitulation now. We have the transition, slightly altered this time. Then we're into the second subject, this time C major, tonic major. Again, we hear that rhythm in the second subject group. We can't get away from that motto rhythm, dum, 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 as before. We hear the motto again in C major. Then we're into the Codetta, which of course acts as the bridge to the Cadenza, the tutti. Then we get to the Cadenza, which Beethoven wrote himself. And we start with that motto idea in a two-part counterpoint. And so on. Eventually, in the Cadenza, we get to D flat major, the melody, the main motto idea, and then we hear the second subject, and then we come to the Coda. I love the Coda of this movement. We start very soft with the timpani, that motto rhythm, and the Coda builds and builds. We start hearing this on the piano. And then we come to this wonderful cadential flourish in C minor, and we have this thrilling close to this movement. Now the second movement, the Largo, is this beautiful piece, really in a truncated sonata form. It's in E major, which is interesting. Of course, the key of the concerto as a whole is C minor, but here we're in E major. Quite a shift, isn't it? Brahms does a similar thing in the first symphony, between the first and second movements. But here we start with the first subject, which is this beautiful introspective soliloquy by the piano. G major chord in the middle of that. Here. Such a resonant chord in that context, and it opens a new dimension in this music, so beautiful. Then the orchestra carries on this lyrical mood. We hear this in the flutes. And we have this additional idea at the end. We then have a transition. The piano has something like this. Something like that. And then we come to the second subject, and the second subject is very short, and we don't hear it again in this truncated sonata form. We don't hear it in the recapitulation. But it goes something like this. It's like this turn idea. I'll play this on the violin. And then eventually we get to the development. And the development really is over some cascading piano figuration. We have this dialogue between the flute and the bassoon, which eventually, through circuitous route, brings us back to the tonic for the first subject again. And this time the first subject is extended. That bit at the end where we goes dum 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 dum. That's extended. It's spun out by Beethoven. The second subject's completely left out, and then we have this very soft coda, but with a fortissimo chord at the end. The third movement is a sonata rondo, which of course is often the case with classical finales, and we have this idea as the main idea, A. It's kind of got a what they might have called at the time a Turkish Oriental feel to this music. So the piano plays that first, the orchestra then comes in tutti, and then we get to the transition. I really like the transition. Kind of got this martial feel to it. And then eventually that takes us to B, which is this lovely idea. We first of all hear it on the piano with this lovely kind of two-part counterpoint texture to begin with, like a Bach invention, and then the orchestra comes in. Then we've got this Scotch snap feel to it as well. With the piano then. We then have a transition, and we're back to the rondo melody again. So on. And then we're into the C section, which is a development, but we do have this kind of new idea in A flat major on the clarinet. eventually we come to an exciting fugal passage, starting with the cellos, which goes based on that idea. And so on, starting with the cellos and going through the rest of the strings. And then at the end of this exciting development, the C section, we go back to A back in the tonic. We have that military sounding transition again. And then we come to B, this time in C major, the tonic major. We have another transition where we think we must be going back to one final round of the rondo theme, but we have this brief cadenza and we're into this delightful presto coda, dum da dum dum dum, in C major, rather cheeky in nature. And then that takes us on a whirlwind ride right to the final bars of this wonderful, thrilling concerto. Thanks for watching. If this is your kind of thing, please click like and subscribe. Please let me know of any pieces you want me to look at next. And I've put the description for each of the movements in terms of bar lines, etc. below. Thanks for watching. Bye.